Hi there, students. I'm XS. That's little x, little s, which stands for extra sweet, because that's what I am. I'm a Puppy-sensei, and I make Japanese language content to help you level up your abilities. But today, I'm not going to talk to you about Japanese language stuff. If you're interested in learning Japanese, of course, I have a bunch of videos for you to enjoy. Today, however, I'll be opening up to you about something that's very personal and very significant to me. Today, I'm going to begin telling you my coming out story. This is just the first video I'll be putting out in which I talk about my trans journey. No pretentiousness, no fluff, no lore, just the cold, hard facts. Also, for that reason, I should probably start this video out by sharing my pronouns. I don't usually do that, but because of the content of this video, I should not make assumptions. As I said at the beginning, my name is XS, and I'm a trans girl, and I respond to she, her pronouns. I would like to give a blanket warning at the outset here. Some of the things that I'm going to talk about today will be divisive. Some of the things that I'm going to share with you over the course of these videos may be difficult to understand. Some people might not want to hear these stories, and I understand that. I even understand that some of my close friends would probably advise me against sharing some of what I'm going to share with you in this series. But it's my story, and it's my decision to speak openly about it. After all, starting a few weeks ago, I began a new series of videos that I've been calling Minority Report. That's a series where I have been interviewing and asking other content creators to speak openly about their experiences as members of marginalized communities. I guess it's about time that I practiced what I've been asking my friends to do. So starting in this video, I will be talking to you honestly and from a place of vulnerability about what it has been like to be me in these days ever since I first came out of a bathroom on an airplane to China. The first thing that I probably need to explain is that we're all coming out all the time, over and over. We tend to think of the concept of coming out as a fairly unique experience associated with queer spaces, but it doesn't have to be purely limited to that. Coming out can be used to describe any circumstance in which someone shares an aspect of their identity with someone who wasn't previously aware of that thing. Even in the VTuber space, we can think of coming out as a VTuber to friends and family who don't know that we engage in content creation, right? And if you've ever had the occasion to share something personal about yourself with someone who you previously hadn't told, only to have them recoil in horror, to judge you for your choices, or suddenly to treat you differently because this new information about you has come to light, then you have a pretty solid understanding of what it feels like for a trans girl like me to face the kind of common discrimination that we often feel in our day-to-day lives. I bring this up because I want you to understand that I don't have only a singular identifiable coming out event. Coming out is a process. It's something that we sometimes do in stages. It even sometimes involves the process of coming out to yourself. You might sometimes hear this referred to as having your egg cracked, but we'll come back to that in a future video. And on that note, I want you to understand that this is not going to be a sequential story. I'm going to put out multiple of these coming out videos, and in this first one, I'll be sharing with you only a snapshot of one factor of what coming out has looked like for me. Through these videos, I'm going to share with you some key moments and do my best along the way to explain how each of these moments felt, but you shouldn't assume that this is all one linear story. I actually don't even believe that our lives are really governed by linear events. I think that we're shaped by touchstone moments that grow to be more or less important as time moves on. Think about the number of moments in your life, sometimes that an event from your past has suddenly taken on some kind of new significance for you. For example, that birthday party that you had almost forgotten about. And then it suddenly became more significant when a family member who was in attendance passed away. And now, looking back, you're made to remember the significance of that moment in your life that you had otherwise overlooked. Or think about that trinket that fell and broke from a trip that you took, and that you hadn't even thought to remember the trip for years, but you were forced to face a degree of both nostalgia and lament as you realize that you're never going to get that experience back. Think about the mistakes that we made in our youth that we'd nearly put entirely behind us, only to have them come screaming back into our lives unexpectedly. Time may be linear, but memory is not. We exist in a strange bungle of wibbly-wobbly, timey-wimey stuff. Whatever you may feel about the show Doctor Who, the Doctor was right about that. Sometimes cause and effect are not beholden to the laws of linear time. So based on my own prerogative, these are not stories that are based on a sequential ordering of things, but rather, these are stories that are based on my memory and the things that I find most important to my overall messy, chaotic journey through life. I was on an airplane ride to China when I publicly transitioned. Sometimes, when we travel intercontinentally, the most logical and direct flight path takes the plane over the Arctic. Flying from Detroit to Shanghai, it seems, is sometimes one of those cases. It wasn't my first intercontinental flight. In fact, I have to admit my privilege here and say that when I was younger, I had the chance to travel quite a bit. But like plenty of kiddos, I didn't appreciate the chance that I was being given to see the world at the time. I saw it as a burden to move around from place to place where I just didn't appreciate that I was getting the chance to see places that a lot of people might spend their entire lives dreaming about. I'm the type of person who tends to get locked in her own head a lot. I tend to be very introspective, and I can be a little bit fickle, and, well, for a dog, I'm actually very much a scaredy cat, actually. I can be easily deterred from an idea, even if I think it's a good idea. And that has more to do with my past trauma than anything else. I'm deeply, deeply, deeply afraid of letting people down or of making the wrong decision. And I knew that when I decided to publicly transition, there was a chance, maybe even a likelihood, that I might experience some hardship or discrimination that would cause me to panic and retreat back into my closet. So I outsmarted myself. I went to China. I packed a bag with only skirts and dresses. I got on my plane. I found my seat. I waited until we were airborne. And then I went to the bathroom to change my clothes, and I threw away the clothes that I had worn through security. And that was it. There was no going back. One way or another, I was traveling to China as a woman, publicly, and I was gonna be stuck. I couldn't back out. I need to define my terms a little bit here. I want you to start by understanding the difference between a public transition, a medical transition, and a surgical transition. Another term that we're going to need to understand before I go on is closeted. Public transition implies transitioning between genders or sex presentations in public spaces. It implies choosing attire, hairstyles, makeup, vocal effect, accessories that may be different from the gender or sex presentation that you have used previously. In effect, to publicly transition is to style yourself out in the open as your preferred gender. Medical transition is when you start taking hormone blockers or hormone replacement to begin to develop sex characteristics that align with your gender. In 99% of cases, taking these medications is absolutely reversible. The idea that being on HRT as a youth will ruin lives is entirely rooted in transphobia. And of course, the belief that to be trans is to be monstrous and horrible, and that's why we have to prevent the kids from being on HRT, because if the kids are on HRT, then they're going to be monsters. This is a reminder. When you hear people talking about mutilation in regards to trans youths, these are lies that relate to the revulsion people feel about being trans or about trans people existing. To their mind, to be trans is inherently to be mutilated. Not because of our sex parts, but because we're transformed into mutants that are abhorrent to a certain type of person. Finally, surgical transition is a step that is taken only by some trans people, and it involves surgical correction of the sex organs. I have had this surgery, and I will talk about it in a future video. Fact: the youngest person ever to undergo sex reassignment surgery was 17 years old. That surgery did not occur in the United States. As far as any medical journal has ever published, as far as any of the data tells us, no one under the age of 17 has ever sexually transitioned through any surgical means. If you believe otherwise, you've been lied to. And as for that surgery itself, listen, I am going to be talking extensively about that surgery in a future video, but what I can tell you is that for me personally, it took years for me to be able to prove that I was soundly certain that I wanted the surgery, and then even more years and a massive amount of personal capital out of my own pocket to be able to obtain it. There's this very strange lie that's being perpetrated by politicians. And that lie is that some students and soldiers are just magically getting these surgeries done for them without having to drop a dime or even do a modicum of research. I can tell you firsthand, if anyone is just getting these surgeries handed to them on a silver platter, then damn, did I waste my entire life? Because I had to go through grad school and break my back for years as an employee so that I could scrounge up enough scratch to go into massive and insurmountable debt so that I could have my surgery. If teachers are just passing out sex changes like candy, then why the fuck am I so poor? I'm a teacher and I'm trans. Can I please get mine? 'Cause being poor sucks, y'all. All right, so that just leaves one more term to be defined for right now. Oh, hey, look, even when I'm not out here trying to be a teacher, I'm still trying to teach you stuff. We need to understand the term closeted. The term to be in the closet means living a dual life, a life where you behave one way in private and another way in public. Imagine a person who speaks out vocally against the vices of drinking and gambling, but then hides at home, betting on World Series of Poker while throwing back a bottle and a half of whiskey on Saturday night. That's what it's like to be closeted. For some people, leading a double life is okay, because, I don't know, maybe they're cool with living silently in their shame. But for trans people, being in the closet is entirely unhelpful and painful. It means that we never have the experience of feeling loved or accepted or openly respected for being who we are. To be closeted as a trans person means that no one really knows who you are. It means that every interaction that you have outside of your house is a lie. Alright, so that's an overview of important terms. Public transition, wearing clothes that make you feel comfy in your own skin. Medical transition, getting pills that make you feel even more comfy in your own skin. Surgical transition, getting surgery to make you feel whole after years and years and years of preparation. Closeted, hiding who you really are inside for a variety of reasons. Not all of them negative. I'm not being judgmental. Plenty of people just choose to be in the closet, and that's their prerogative, if it's what they choose. if it's what society tells me that I have to do, no. Anyway, today I'll be talking to you about my very first steps in my public transition. I'm a girl. I've always been a girl. From the time I was able to remember my dreams, I've known that I was destined to be a girl. For better or for worse. It's just the only life and the only sex presentation and the only existence that has ever made any sense at all to me. However, for much of my life, I didn't have the support that I needed to be able to present the way that I wanted to present. Like many trans people, I grew up in an environment where I guessed, and rightly so, it would turn out that I would not be accepted. There were constant hints and clues all around me that if my family knew how I felt, there would quite literally be hell to pay. And so for much of my childhood, I was closeted. As a very young child, I would long for the night to come so that I could be alone in my room and magically transform in my dreams into the girl that I knew I was supposed to be. And I mean that quite literally. You know how a lot of parents struggle to get their kids into bed? It was never the case with me. I could not wait to crawl into bed. I would honestly pray every night before I went to bed to whatever deity is out there that they would allow me to have one of my dreams where I got to be a girl. I would wake up sad when I did not have one of those dreams. At least in my dreams, I could be who I was meant to be. It wasn't until later that I started to be able to do things like explore with clothes and makeup that would allow me to actually begin to really feel at home in my body. But even then, I was constantly alone, constantly closeted, and constantly in abject terror that someone would discover the hidden, gnarly truth about my life. That the veil of my deep and dark secret shame would get exposed, and that everyone would know that I was a girl. A normal girl. A girl who liked anime and scary stories and stuffed animals and wanted nothing more in this entire world than to learn how to tap dance. So, pretty much not all that different from who I am today. As my life would go on, I would come out to select individuals at different points in my life. Sometimes those people were shocked, but pretty accepting. Sometimes they were disgusted. Sometimes they would surprise me by saying, "Me too!" I will share one story that, at the time, I'm going to be honest and tell you that it felt like the most mortifying experience that could ever happen to any person ever, but looking back on it today, I actually find it a little bit hilarious in a kind of morbid way. I went to a Japanese restaurant with a friend. We were both far too young to drive, so we walked there. I had never been to this particular restaurant before, but I was excited to go, and I was looking forward to getting the experience of what a Japanese restaurant in the United States was going to be like. And I made a weird decision. I made the choice to wear these really cute, frilly little socks under my clothes that I had. I had actually never worn them before. I had only bought them very recently, and I was really excited to try them out. I was closeted from this friend, but for whatever reason, I decided that today was the day that I was going to wear these sheer, cute, pink socks out and about. They had these adorable little bows at the ankle that were pressed up against my legs under my stompy boots. It certainly wasn't my first time wearing things like this out into the real world, but clearly I was obviously hiding it. And then we got to the restaurant, and when we got there, I learned that all of the tables were tatami-style seating, meaning they expected us to sit on cushions, sitting on our legs when we ate, meaning they also expected us to remove our shoes before we could be seated. And here I was, in my adorable little pink sockies. What was I to do in that moment? I could feign sickness and bolt out the door. I could ask my friend to reschedule. I contemplated asking my heart to kindly burst in that moment, but if I had died right there, then perhaps someone would take off my stompy boots and learn my secret post-mortem. I could, maybe excuse myself for the bathroom and peel off my cute little socks. Or, I could just say screw it and go all in, which is what I did. Little pink bows out and proud. Unfortunately, I never saw my friend again after that. He stopped answering my calls, probably because he was utterly humiliated. And I'm sorry about that. But at the same time, I think that that's also something that we should talk about when it comes to transphobia. Transphobia does not have to be an act of violence. It doesn't have to be spitting in someone's face because you think they're icky. I've been through that. I think a lot of people are really afraid of being called transphobic because we tend to be pretty overt about castigating transphobes. We tend to shun transphobes a little bit, maybe because they deserve it. As David Lynch said, change your heart or die. We tend to equate transphobia with things like bigotry, and I think a lot of people who don't actually know a trans person will recoil in terror at the idea that they might be a bad person. They don't want to be called a bad person. Most people don't want to be a bad person, and even fewer people want to be seen as a bad person. But the reality is that sometimes transphobia is a very passive act. Sometimes it's your friend sitting with you during a meal at a Japanese restaurant trying very hard not to mention your cute little pink socks with the adorable little bows at the ankle until you go your separate ways and never speak again. I mean, sure, it absolutely wasn't fair that I put him in that situation. But it wasn't a date. At least I never intended it to be a date. Oh my god, what if he thought it was a date and he ghosted me because he... You know what? Let's not go down that road. The point is that transphobia doesn't need to be an overt act. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, you're not the kind of friend I want to have. And yeah, you have that right. You do. You should. I'm speaking directly to you out there, transphobic person. You have the right to choose not to associate with trans people. Nobody should ever be in a position where they are honestly able to force you to be buddies with me or with anybody else out there. You shouldn't have to be forced to be friends with somebody. You should be allowed to associate with who you want to associate. And if you choose not to associate with trans people, I'm very fond of saying you don't really get to decide who comes into your life. But in almost all cases, you end up getting to decide how long they stay. But even if you don't like it, even if it makes you feel icky inside, it is still transphobia to say, hey, you're trans, and I don't want to associate with you. And even more so, when you meet somebody and you don't know that they're trans, and then they trust you enough to let you into their inner life to say, hey, I like you enough that I want you to know that I'm trans, and I hope you'll still like me. Think of the level of betrayal. If you are friends with someone, and when you find out that they're trans, you go, well, we're not friends anymore. That really sucks. And I've lived through that. Deciding not to be friends with a trans girl who just wants to wear cute socks while she munches on edamame is a transphobic act. And that's okay. See, the truth is that there's a vast gulf of difference between doing something transphobic and being a transphobe. I do transphobic stuff from time to time. I have transphobic thoughts sometimes. We all have our biases. We all have our preferences. We can all be just a little bit racist from time to time. Our brains, unfortunately, are hardwired to see patterns and to gravitate towards things that make us comfortable and away from things that make us uncomfortable. That's what it is to be human. So me saying, you did that and it was bad, is very different from me saying you're a bad person. I need to be reminded of that too sometimes. Just because we do something bad doesn't mean we are bad. Just because you do something transphobic doesn't mean that you're bad. It's something that we can learn from and grow from and get better. That's my hope anyway. Back to the airplane. I threw away my boy clothes. After coming back to my seat in a skirt and an orange shirt with a dragonfly on it, I spent the next few hours looking out the window. Remember when I told you that often when an airplane flies from Detroit to China, it flies over the Arctic Circle? Well, I was looking out the window at a sea of white below. I remember daydreaming in that moment about how much I wanted to see a polar bear down there in the snow below me. And listen, there are a bunch of reasons why that would have been impossible. I know that now. I know now that we were so high up that there was no way that I could ever be able to spot a well-camouflaged polar bear on a blanket of ice and snow. I know that that polar bear would have looked too small to actually be seen from where I was. I know that there was probably an infinitesimally small chance that this plane would even be flying over a place where there would have been a polar bear in that moment. I know all of that, but shut up. At the time, I was just a kid. I was young and I was stupid and I didn't know any better and I wanted to see a polar bear, okay? And I think that's important. I think we have to address the polar bear in the room here. See, I know a lot of trans people are newly out and publicly transitioning, and when we do that, we don't know a lot yet. And at that time, we don't, yeah. As much as I don't want to, we need to talk about passing a little bit. In the vernacular of trans spaces, passing refers to looking sufficiently convincing as our preferred gender presentation, such that we're more often than not read as that gender by other people. When people look at me and they see a girl and they don't think that's a trans girl, they think that's a girl, that's passing. Passing, therefore, is really a double-edged sword, in my opinion. It can be something that we as trans people strive for our safety, for our sanity, for our happiness, and just because it feels really good to be gendered correctly. But also, in some cases, passing can be a type of gatekeeping. My early inability to pass was used against me in my early days of transition, even by other trans people. But that's another story for another day. For now, though, I do need to discuss the idea of passing and how it played into the idea of my own coming out story, because it can be pretty complicated and interesting to some degree. So let me speak openly. While I was on that airplane to China, I didn't pass. I was very early in my transition. I hadn't started to grow breasts yet. My skin hadn't softened due to the effects of hormone replacement therapies. My body hadn't adjusted, and if I'm being entirely candid with you, I just didn't know what I was doing. I didn't wear complimentary clothes. I just put on a collection of things that I thought looked girly, and I called it a day. I was months away from really learning the foundation of makeup, pun intended. I didn't know how to style my hair in a feminine way. In short, I didn't pass, and I know that now. But then, it didn't really matter. I was taking my first footfalls into a journey that would lead me into finally being myself. What did it matter to me if people didn't perceive me as a girl? Spoiler alert, it mattered. It really mattered. Here's the thing about passing. Passing is privilege. But sometimes it's also a choice. Why would some people choose not to pass? Well, I've known a bunch of trans people who not only didn't care if they passed or not, but they actively wanted not to pass. Generally speaking, the reason an individual might not want to pass as their lived gender might be because they're actively skirting the line between genders. Some people prefer to be androgynous. Some people prefer to challenge others with their gender presentation. This is also the reason that some people choose to use neo-pronouns. This is interesting to me because from the point of view of linguistics, pronouns are supposed to be a grammatically closed category. We aren't supposed to be able to add new words into the pronoun category. So when a trans individual chooses a neo-pronoun, they're saying, I refuse to abide by a system that is inherently unfair and oppressive, and not even the rules of grammar can stop me. That's bold. It's pretty cool, to be honest. Talk to most linguists, and we're going to tell you that there's a very big difference between prescriptive grammar, the rules that tell you how you're supposed to speak, for instance, not using the word y'all, and descriptivism. That's the way that people actually do speak. People who choose to adopt they, them pronouns or neo-pronouns often want to stand out. They want people to stop and question their gender. They invite the common person to look at them through questioning, narrowed eyes. They work hard to make it so that other people are uncomfortable. Because when people are uncomfortable, they stop and think, oh, why must men be like this? And why must women be like that? Why do we have to conform to gender roles and gender rules? Why can't I wear a cheerleading skirt under a tweed blazer? When people choose to weaponize gender nonconformance, they may be, not always, but they may be trying to make a statement. Maybe a political statement. Or maybe they're not. Maybe some of them just threw together a slapdash gender presentation because they couldn't be buggered. The we're supposed to do this or we're supposed to do that rules of the world are a prison. And I've known a lot of non-binary people who choose not to pass for the express purpose of making people question why gender is the way it is, and thereby starting a dialogue and hopefully breaking down that prison. Sometimes that's very uncomfortable, and is it any wonder that some cranky old people get all uppity about the they-thems? But it's an important conversation to have. There's this movie that I really like called Rat Race. It is an incredibly silly movie. I honestly really enjoy it. It's a very subversive movie, sometimes dangerously so. But there's a part of this movie that I really love. Cuba Gooding Jr. is playing a disgraced NFL referee in the movie, and while sitting at a bar, he calls out for the bartender and he says, "Excuse me, miss?" She turns around and is somewhat masculine in her presentation, prompting Gooding to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were a woman." To which she responds as if it were the easiest and silliest thing in the world, "I am a woman." And we never talk about or think about the interaction again for the rest of the film. It's played for laughs. She looks like a man. Ha ha. But weirdly, when you actually break this down, it's almost the ideal interaction from the point of view of the trans experience. This is what many gender-critical people don't get. We don't get angry when you misgender us once. We get angry when you refuse to gender us correctly after we try to correct your mistake, which we often try to do very politely. And I think that's why many non-binary people present in a very androgynous way, to provoke that "I thought you were a woman" conversation. This isn't me, for the record. I'm not trying hard to force those conversations in my day-to-day life. I have always been a head down, please don't perceive me kind of woman. I literally just want to go through my day and bother nobody always ever in any way. I'm the kind of girl who will stop the microwave 1 second before it goes off because I worry about the beeping sound of the microwave causing people distress. That's who I have always been. I'm someone who tries with all of her might just to not be a burden to other people. And for me, that idea of not wanting to be a burden has seriously extended to the level even of my personal advocacy, which, you know, is kind of less than ideal from a certain point of view. I was raised with some very firm and ultimately damning ideals pressed into me about what I can talk about, when I can talk about it, and particularly how much autonomy I can have over exercising my voice. In short, I did not grow up in an environment where I felt empowered to speak up, to speak freely, or to question much of anything. In an environment where I was constantly being made to feel like being me was going to be met with violence, I spent most of my childhood learning to hide myself away. And the women that I admired in my life, the women that I grew up wanting to be like, were often equally stifled. And that's just reality for a lot of women. There are as many ways to be a woman as there are women on the planet. We're all different. Some women are fierce and remarkable heroes who slam the patriarchy with their defiance. Some are housewives. Some are trans women. The cruelest reality of the modern conservative movement is that it's managed to dupe a lot of people into thinking that life was better 50 years ago when women were docile and terrified. Now, me personally, I am docile and terrified. In a very weird way, I'm a lot of things that the conservative movement would actually uphold as the gold standard for all women. I'm quiet. I'm shy. I'm obedient to a fault. It's just that modern conservatism hates me because I was born a little different. Anyway, we started talking about passing, and I need to be upfront about that. While I was on that airplane to China some years ago, flying over the Arctic Circle and imagining that somehow I could see a polar bear 30,000 feet below me, I didn't pass. I didn't come close to passing. And maybe I should have believed that I was in more danger than I realized in that moment. If there was a warning alarm going off in the back of my mind that I was going to be alone in a country that isn't particularly well known for being open and accepting of queer identities, I had somehow managed to turn that part of my brain off because there was something almost exciting about being able to explore myself in a very subversive way. I will talk more about what it was like to not pass in China another time, but for today, what I want to convey to you is that I was naive enough to force myself into the small box that is transcontinental airplane with my little suitcase filled with nothing but girls' clothes. These days, I do pass, and that's a special privilege that I have. In my day-to-day life, most people who mean well just perceive me as a girl and move on with their lives. As I said already, that's a privilege that I have today that not a lot of people actually have. A lot of trans people don't have the luxury of passing, which adds a complicated factor into their lives and increases the amount of danger that they face. So let me talk for a brief moment about the US passport situation and why I think it's so incredibly cruel. Many trans people utilize their physical documents day to day as a means of protection, a shield when we do inevitably get called out as invalid, unwelcome, and dangerous. It's incredibly helpful for a non-passing trans woman who gets told that she's not allowed to pee to be able to pull out her passport and show that simple F marker. It's validation and proof that provides a real safety net against trans exclusionary practices. And it makes everyone's life worse too. For a woman like me, what exactly am I supposed to do when someone inevitably questions why I'm in a women's bathroom and demands to see proof that I'm a woman? I mean, I suppose at this point I can just flip up my skirt. I'm post-op. But that's not enough, is it? Because even post-op, Even with female parts between my legs, the current government is still demanding that certain things happen, like my passport be reverted, or that I'm denied basic rights. I'm being told that I'm officially still masculine in spite of the fact that 1, I'm ill-equipped, 2, I have breasts that I grew myself, 3, I'm only known in the whole of the world as a woman, and 4, I've been living as a woman for a long time now. So which one is it, GOP? If people can't transition throughout their lives, why are you asking me to transition to being a man? I can't do that. And if name changes are so hard, why are you asking us to refer to a body of water by a new name? Are we supposed to start using he, him pronouns for Lady Liberty next because she, her is too soft? It would seem that according to new US policy, I'm supposed to use the men's room when I have to pee. But you know, in my mind, I think there are some logistical problems with that. No, we know the truth. The truth is that the entire program is all about forcing us out of the public eye. We're being asked not to leave our houses. We're being asked not to be visible. We're being asked to politely go ahead and die. And now I'm going to make a very controversial statement that will almost definitely go poorly, but I'm going to do it anyway. We're going to take a quick detour here and we're going to talk about genocide. The current conservative movement is right now trying to pass multiple pieces of legislation in America that constitute a genocide of trans people. Genocide doesn't need to be performed with guns or chemical weapons. If you pass laws saying a certain class of people can no longer exist, that's genocide. And what we have seen from the current administration, what's that? Laws that say people cannot be trans? Laws that say people who are trans are not worthy of protection? Laws that say trans people are fraudulent? Laws that say trans people aren't allowed to use the bathroom? Laws that say trans people can't play sports? Laws that say trans people can't serve our country as members of our military? Laws that say trans people are not allowed to be patriotic? Laws that say trans people cannot have access to medication that saves our lives? Laws that would prevent gender reassignment surgery at any age. Call it what it is. It's genocide. They are attempting to make it so that we cannot exist. And that is not different from putting a bullet right against our skulls. This is a reminder, gentle viewer. If some of these laws pass, it may mean that trans people can no longer legally access HRT. And I want you to understand this. If I have no access to HRT, I will die. That's not hyperbole. It's not. Check the facts. Do 10 seconds of research. Trans women who are post-op and are denied access to estrogen die. Not from self-inflicted trauma. Our bones dissolve and we die. The human body cannot live without the dominant hormone. This is why men who need to have their testicles removed have to be on testosterone. So here it is. This is your call to action right here, right now. Are you one of my viewers? Are you an American? Do you watch other trans creators who may also be post-op? This is the simple truth. If the current political sway stays as it is, and the lawmakers in power have their way, if access to all hormone treatments for all trans people, regardless of age, is revoked, I'll die. I will literally die. I will wither away, and I won't be here anymore. No more Puppy-sensei. No more Japanese lessons. No more translation. No more me. Why? Because of hate. Call it what it is. Don't call it a political question. Call it genocide. But here's the thing, and again, I know what I'm about to say is going to be very inflammatory. This isn't meant to be clickbait or sparking controversy at all. It's just the simple reality as I see it. I want you to imagine for a moment that you took every polar bear on the planet today and you put them all together in one place. Let's say North Dakota. You round up every single polar bear on the entire Earth right now, and you place each and every one of them somewhere in North Dakota. And then you refuse to allow them to hunt, or be with their families, or pee. You don't provide them with one single vital nutrient that they need to live. Maybe you feed them, but you only feed them carrots. And you keep them there until they die. Until every polar bear on the planet dies. Okay? Are you with me so far? We've just killed off all the polar bears. All of them. Everyone. We gathered every one of them up and we kept them in a camp until they died. Now there is not one polar bear left on the entire planet. Okay? All gone. In that hypothetical, there would never, ever be another polar bear. Never. You see that, right? That's the way it works. If you get rid of all of the polar bears, a new polar bear is not going to be born because you killed them all. They're extinct. But I'd like to look at the same example from a different perspective. Let's now take every trans person. All of us. Every one of us in the whole world. You take all of us and you move us to North Dakota. We're not allowed to work. We can't have official documentation. We're not allowed to pee. We can't afford to eat, and we don't have access to healthcare because we're not allowed to work. And since we don't have healthcare, we don't have the medications that keep us alive. And we die. All of us. Every one of us. We're all gone. Do you know what's different here? We're not fucking polar bears. If you rounded up every trans person today, on this day, you rounded up every trans person on the entire planet and you got rid of all of us, a new trans person would be born within 2 minutes. You can't kill people's inborn desire to be who they're meant to be. You might slow down our progress for a while. You might make our lives harder in the short term, but you will never get rid of us. 5 years later, 10 years later, you're going to have kiddos saying, "Mommy, Mommy, I want to wear a dress." And when you say no, we're going to want it all that much more. And when you try to stifle us, we're going to find a way. Nothing you do will stop us ever. You can't kill an idea. Especially not with tyranny and hate. And that's all they have. That's it.